That's what I'm going to talk about today from the story of Jacob and Esau. Now, many of you that are listening and watching, you probably know the story of Jacob and Esau, brothers. And of course, Jacob steals his brother's blessing by deceiving his father Isaac into making him think that he was Esau. And once that blessing was given, it could not be reversed. Now, Esau did come and still received a blessing from Isaac, but it wasn't the greater blessing. And so there's even grace here. Now, one of the amazing things about this story is that in spite of Jacob's trickery, in spite of his deception, he goes through some things, but God still protects him because he has the blessing. He's a covenant man. And God takes him a lot, protects him as he goes to his father's house, his uncle's house, rather, Laban, who is a trickster himself. So one trickster meets another. And Laban really deceives Jacob, first of all, by giving him his second daughter, his oldest daughter, instead of the one that Jacob loved. He ends up marrying both daughters, and he changes his wages. And yet Jacob, even though he goes through a difficult time, when it comes time for him to leave his father, his uncle Laban, he's blessed. He's increased. Jacob is a very clever man. And he figures out a way to get all the speckled and spotted livestock by setting up some bark or trees that he has cut, some branches, and pulling the branches and causing the branches to be striped, that when the livestock came to mate, when they looked at the branches, somehow they had speckled and spotted livestock, which was the deal that he made with Laban. Laban thought that it's only going to be a few of these livestock born. I'll get all the good ones. He'll get the speckled ones. And yet he ends up with all these speckled animals and ends up prospering. And so now he's asking God to bring him back to his home. He's been away from his home for years. And now he's leaving. And when he leaves, God visits Laban in a dream. Laban is upset. And God visits Laban in a dream and tells Laban not to hurt Jacob. So we see a lot of grace on Jacob's life, even though he is a trickster, even though what he does is not exactly, how can I say this, righteous, yet we see a lot of grace on his life because he's chosen. God chooses this young man. So we see an amazing example of grace in the life of Jacob. Then he wrestles with the angel. The angel touches him. He's called Israel. His name is changed from Jacob to Israel, which means Prince of God. So it's an amazing, amazing story of grace. Now, again, Esau still gets a blessing from his father, even though it is not the blessing he wanted. So we even see grace in Esau, upon Esau, even though Esau sold his birthright for a pot of stew. The grace of God is amazing to me because God gives grace even when we believe that we don't deserve it. Some people call grace undeserved favor, undeserved blessing. But when you read the scriptures, I want you to see, because sometimes when you read scriptures, this is not to excuse anyone's bad behavior. This is not just to tell people you can do whatever you want to do and God's going to bless you. That's not the purpose of this lesson. But you have to, when you read scriptures, you have to read them through the lens of grace. Your eyes need to see the grace of God in these stories. Now, I mentioned this, that grace is found in the scripture. The word grace is found in the King James Version 159 times in the King James Version. So it's a very important subject. It's found the most in the book of Romans, 20 times in the book of Romans. Second, in the book of 2 Corinthians, it is found 13 times. And in Ephesians, it is found 12 times. And I love to look at the way the word grace comes up in scripture, because those are some of the books you can key in on. But the first time the word grace is found is in Genesis 6 and 8, where it says that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So I can really do a whole story on Noah. Noah is the first person in scripture where it specifically says that he found grace. Grace is used first in reference to Noah. So the whole story of Noah is one of grace. If you want to, again, get your understanding of grace better. And what I've done, or what I'm doing, I'm looking at every time the word grace is mentioned in scripture. Now, I may have not time to do that on the porch, but in my personal study, I'm looking at every time the word grace is used, every verse, and just looking at the verse, reading the verse, asking God for greater understanding of the subject of grace. I believe that it will give you, if you want to do this study with me, please do it. This is just the way I study scripture. It's really been beneficial to me to really understand certain truths, and grace is one of the most important things. Now, I don't want to study grace just so I can have a greater knowledge. I want to make this applicable to my life because I want more grace. I want abundance of grace. I want mega grace. I want the blessing of grace in my life. I want to be a gracious person. So I really want a revelation of this particular subject. So that's what I'm going to be doing on the porch for a few days. I don't know how long this is going to last. It depends on if I really get stirred up. But now Jacob has a problem. He's leaving his father's house and he hears that Esau is coming to meet him. We're going to look at some verses in Genesis 32 and Genesis chapter number 33. And he's afraid because Esau, after Jacob stole his blessing, Esau had determined to kill Jacob. And his mother, Rebekah, was the one that got Jacob away and sent her to her family in Syria. So he knows that Esau wanted to kill him. So now he's afraid. And he's afraid as he comes back that Esau is going to meet him and kill him. And so as he comes, it says in verse number 3 of Genesis chapter 32, Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, thus shall you speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I've sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. And I have oxen and asses, flocks, men servants and women servants. And I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight. So that's one of the times grace is mentioned in Genesis. What Jacob is asking for is grace from his brother Esau. And he says, and the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. So Esau is coming with a small army, 400 men. And it says in verse number 7, Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And he divided the people that was with him and the flocks and herds and the camels into two bands, and said, if Esau come to the company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. So Jacob is afraid that Esau is coming to kill him with 400 men. And then he prays to God in verse 11 of Genesis 32. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. And thou saidest, I will surely do thee good and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So he reminds God of the covenant that God promised him. And so he asks God to deliver him. He's afraid. He needs grace. Now he has grace with God. He has favor with God. God has blessed Jacob. God has kept Jacob. God has given Jacob a promise. God has made Jacob the promise that his seed would be mighty. But now he needs favor with man, or grace with man. When we talk about grace, we talk about grace with God and with man. Grace is also favor. Now he needs grace with his brother, so his brother will not destroy him. And so he sends a gift ahead of himself to Esau. He sends part of his flocks to Esau. He's hoping that a gift will stop Esau from killing him. So he sends a whole group of animals ahead to meet Esau. Again, Jacob is very clever. Now we know the scripture says a man's gift will make room for him and bring him before great men. But we're going to see something very interesting in this story that I've never seen before until I revisited this particular story of Jacob and Esau. And so as you go through the story, he sends these flocks ahead as a gift to Esau, hopefully to bring down his anger. He thinks Esau's out to kill him. And he commanded them to bring these gifts to Esau. And then in chapter 33, when he finally meets Esau, Esau says this in verse number 8. And he said, "What meanest thou by all this drove which I met?" Then he said, "These are to find grace." Here it is again, grace in thy sight. So he's telling Esau, I sent that to you because I need grace. I need mercy. I need favor. But yet notice what Esau says. Why are you sending me all this? It seems as if Esau was not coming to kill him. Esau was coming to meet him. God had softened Esau's heart. And God had already given Jacob grace and favor with his brother Esau that Jacob did not know about. And so Esau says, "Why did you send me all this?" In other words, I didn't ask you for this. I didn't need this. And Jacob says, "I did it to find grace in your sight." And so it seems as if Jacob was so afraid of not having grace with his brother Esau that he sent all of these gifts to him without really having to do so. And then we see that Esau asked him, "Why did you send this?" When Esau met him, Esau gets off of his animal, hugs him, they weep, they cry. It's really a story of restoration and reconciliation between Jacob and Esau. It's an amazing story of grace and forgiveness and love between two brothers that represent flesh and spirit, that are not on speaking terms, that had not spoken with each other for years, had not seen each other for years. But it's an amazing story of the grace of God. God had evidently had prospered Esau. Esau has 400 men. So God had also made Esau wealthy, made him powerful, in spite of the fact that he sold his birthright. So we see grace in the life of Esau. We see, even though the scripture says, "Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated," that's in reference to election. And we're not going to talk about election, but Jacob is the elect of God, chosen by God. With grace, God chooses people. This is the amazing thing about grace. When God chooses an individual, anoints an individual, he did it with David, he did it with Abraham, he did it with Isaac, he did it with Jacob. When God chooses and elects a person for his purpose, there is a grace that comes on their life. Now, when God does that for you, it's nothing for you to boast about. It is nothing for you to brag about. It is simply God's grace. God's grace causes a choice. God's grace anoints people. God's grace calls people. Paul received the grace of God. He was a killer, a blasphemer, yet God chose him, called him, had grace on him, gave him grace. And Paul said, "By the grace of God, I am what I am." So this is the amazing thing about grace. Grace comes on your life when you don't deserve it, when you don't work for it, when you don't earn it. It's a gift of God. That's what I love about grace. I want those on the porch to realize this, because many of you are fighting and struggling and working, trying to get God's blessing. Receive it, believe it, accept it. It's yours. It's not difficult. God freely gives us his grace. And then in Genesis 32:10, he says this to his brother Esau. And Jacob said, "Nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me." And Esau receives it. In verse 15, Esau said, let me now leave thee with some of the folk that are with me. I'm going to leave some of my men with you, Jacob, to make sure you're protected as you go home. And he said, what needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. And so we see that in Genesis 33, this word grace is used in reference to Jacob and Esau. So grace can be used in reference to God. It can be used in reference to relationships, to men, to people. I encourage you to read Genesis 32 and 33. Matter of fact, read the whole story of Jacob and Esau and read it through the lens of grace. How that in spite of all the trickery, the lying, the deception, Esau selling his birthright, in spite of all that, we see the grace of God coming on these two young men, on these brothers, not only with God, but also with each other. And they're being both the sons of Isaac. The grace of God can come on you because of your parent, because of your parents, because of your spiritual parents, because of your natural parents. So many different ways the blessing and grace of God can come on your life.